It is that time of the week again. It is time to take a deeper look at the beat that is mixed martial arts. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studios, and I am alongside the self-proclaimed A-Team. They're back. They're finally here. Luke Thomas, welcome back, of MMAfighting.com and SiriusXM Radio. He is back in the house. Mike Chiappetta of FoxSports.com. He is here as well. And then, of course, old reliable himself, the man with the hat, Chuck Mindenhall.
What's up, guys?
Great to have the A-Team back.
Yeah.
Many hats.
Has a bag full of hats.
I do.
Is it? It kind of seems like it's the same hat every time these days.
No, I've got several of this color.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
I think I might have worn this one last
colorblind.
time.
That is true. I am, in fact, colorblind. How about that? All right, guys. At first glance, somewhat of a quiet week in the world of MMA, but then you dig a little deeper, and there were a lot of interesting things that happened since we last did a show last week. Let's start with the Fight for the Troops card. Tim Kennedy was threatening to kill many unicorns on Twitter, but they finally stopped him by offering him Sapo Natal. That's the new main event on November 6th. Your thoughts on the main event?
It is kind of weird. There's a question: is it the worst main event in UFC history? It's up there. No, I'm not. Like, it's not even like an insult. If you just had like some of the best and some of the worst, and if you have to rank the worst,
ask that question.
you can look back and it's like, well, what about Tito Ortiz versus Elvis Sinicic? That was terrible. Cro Cop versus Mir was bad, but I think that one had more sentimental value. Cro Cop was a sympathetic figure. There's some other ones you can list.
And that was bad after the fact. Going into it wasn't the worst.
And that was also pay-per-view, so I think that got extra scrutiny. This one is free. Also, you can't kill him too much. It's for a great cause. Like, yes, the UFC is going to make money off of it, but they're going to make money for people who desperately need the money for research and rehabilitation, wounded veterans. So, and the whole, like, you can't kill him. I just wonder, though, and I'm sure we're going to talk about Okami, if you're at a point where your headline is two guys who aren't even in the top 10, who there's a real question about how far they can actually get in the game, that don't have a ton of sympathetic value as fan favorites, I sort of wonder, why not just change it up? Because it seems to me like what they did was give Kennedy a favor, right? Because Kennedy is obviously, as a former Special Forces Army Ranger, he wanted desperately to be on this card. And Natal is a decent challenge, but candidly speaking, as a main event, who cares? I honestly would rather see, to me, the fight of that card, because you want to see how far these guys can go. Rustam Kabalov versus Jorge Masvidal. Like, that reminds me, it's not exactly the same, but it kind of reminds me of Diego Sanchez versus Carl Parisian. Like, two guys who have a lot to prove, that can still make a claim to be on the path towards upper echelon fighting. Why not just switch it up and get at least get the hardcore fans excited?
That fight's still on the card, though. It's just a matter of two more rounds.
Yeah, but promote that as the main event.
I think with Tim Kennedy on the card, he has to be the main event. I just think people have to realize that the UFC has planned so many fights from now until the end of the year. There just are not that many guys available at middleweight. Yeah. There is the criticism, hey, they just cut a guy who was a top 10 middleweight that could have filled in. Okay, that's fair. I think that's a valid criticism. But the fact of the matter is they did cut him. He's gone. And
he's also coming off a knockout, so
he
could have been ready.
Right, but that's fair also. I don't know if he would have been cleared by now.
But in this day and age of concussion, I mean, that's a pretty quick turnaround. A little less than 2 months.
2 months? Usually it's 60 days, so It's possible. It's possible he could have filled in if they had gone that route. But the fact of the matter, either way, is they cut him. And once you cut him, I don't think you're going to pull him back that quickly into the fold. So you had a limited number of guys to deal with anyways, and there just wasn't a lot of compelling options. I mean, I think the other guy that you could have looked at is Francis Carmont. He's in a winning streak. He just came off another victory recently. He's probably in pretty good shape. I haven't heard of any injuries related to his last fight. But would that fight be any better? I mean, is that going to, excite a lot
Dana
more
White's
people?
still hating on that fight on Twitter weeks later.
Yeah, and I think the fact of the matter is, it's a charitable event. It's an important event in terms of what it's doing for the troops and people who need this help. So, I think you have to kind of temper your criticism as a result of that.
It was. You were mentioning sort of like Tito Ortiz and these guys. I mean, but at least he was Tito Ortiz. He was Tito Ortiz. For some reason, all of a sudden, Tim Kennedy has this added import, which came out of almost nowhere, I feel like. He was being talked about with Vitor Belfort, which seemed like a huge upgrade of competition for him to be so new into the UFC's fold. And then Lyoto Machida. This actually sort of comes down to the real, like where he should maybe be at this point, which is a guy against a guy like with Sapo. So it's like it's a sort of a strange roundabout way of finding him an opponent where maybe he should be at this exact moment. But to me, like you mentioned, you guys have mentioned, it's for the troops. They do this semi-traditionally. They've had better main events. You mentioned that it's been pretty watered down with everything that's with all the events that are going on. I think, given the circumstances, it's not the worst. But I think that Tim Kennedy coming off a pretty bad fight with Roger Gracie, that doesn't help. And then even though Sapo's had, I think, 9 UFC fights. I mean, he's really never had a push where you really know who he is. He's fought in Brazil 3 of his last 4. Nobody really knows who he is. In some ways, if you look at the silver linings, you can say, well, this is his springboard into our consciousness a little bit.
And real quickly, listen, the troops are going to love it, right? Having Tim Kennedy on that card, there's other veterans on the card, Liz Carmouche on the card. Like, to me, I'm a former U.S. Marine. That's a cool thing that they're doing. I mean, I'm not trying to kill them about it. But also, in fairness to the UFC, I was mentioning the Sinicic Ortiz fight, which, by the way, it ended in the first round. It was a horrible fight. Like, Tito Ortiz just murked him. But they have different tiered systems now. There's a pay-per-view. There's the Ultimate Fighter finales. There's the Fight for the Troops. There's like the fight nights, and then the hierarchy of events, which didn't used to exist in those days. Not that the UFC doesn't make the troops a priority. I'm in no way suggesting that. But if I had to rank the cards, Fight for the Troops is not the highest priority card. I can understand why the developments have unfolded as they have.
The intentions were good, though. They had Machida there.
Of course,
you mentioned some good fights.
My question is, do people watch other sports? Do MMA fans watch other sports? Depth in sports is always a problem. Like in baseball, millions of kids across America and across the world play baseball at high levels, college and minor leagues. Every team in baseball has trouble finding 5 quality starters. Most teams are lucky if they have 1 or 2. And then when you get further down, there's problems with depth. I don't understand why people think it will be any different in our sport, that once you get past a few stars, the other guys are just not as good.
The bottom line is, if you don't want to watch it, you just don't watch it.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the option to watch it or not watch it. They're putting this on specifically for the troops. It's like, so if you don't want to watch it at home, you don't have to. It sort of reminds me, just getting back to the main events, the Charlie Brenneman one, when he sort of filled in on 24 hours notice when he was fighting Rick Story, which had a similar thing where neither guy had really been in a spot like that before. And suddenly they were going to be a main event. I know it was like within 24-hour notice. This one has got a little bit more, but it has a little bit of that vibe to it.
Pat Barry Czech Congo leapfrogged them as the new main event after that happened.
Oh, right.
Which one they're paying?
Yes, I do.
Was
it actually the main event? I remember it was the fight of the year.
It then became the main event after Charlie Brenneman. But hey, how about Mousasi Latifi?
Oh, that is a terrible one.
But
Mousasi's a top 10 fighter.
There was the intrigue of Mousasi making his debut. There was a bit of a rocky story to Latifi.
And there was the drama of, will Gustafsson fight? Will he not
there was
fight?
something
F
there.
the commission. All that stuff.
The Latifi hype train going into that fight was out of this world.
So the domino effect in all of this was that Machida was taken off the card to fight Mark Munoz after Bisping re-injured that eye of his. For Mark Munoz, interesting because he has trained with Lyoto Machida many times. Which is a tougher fight for him? Machida now on what? 4 or so weeks' notice? Or the Bisping fight that he was preparing for?
I definitely think Machida's a tougher fight. Mark Munoz, I had to give the guy credit. Coming back the way he did in that Tim Boetsch fight, Chris Weidman thrashed him. And then, I know he had the injuries, but he got worked, and there was a late stoppage, and he gained all that weight. I mean, that fight took it almost took his soul, but he recaptured and got himself back together and looked dominant against Tim Boetsch. What a way to come back. Hats off to that guy. But nevertheless, I don't think some of the things that have plagued him in his career will be gone here. For me, you look at his takedown rates and takedown defense for Mark Munoz, which is really central to his game, mixing it up. He does have knockout power, but he's not like a straight kickboxer. He doesn't really blast through guys. He kind of stops at them. You really saw that in the Okami fight. I think Machida, between his movement and understanding how Mark sets up shots, is just going to be a nightmare matchup for him. And you can make the argument, well, Munoz trained with him too. I've trained with really good black belts. I know some of their setups. I can't stop them. I cannot stop them. And I really feel like, yes, it's late notice, but Machida's particular style of fighting is just a horrible, horrible matchup for Mark Munoz.
Machida's everyone's worst matchup, isn't he? I mean,
not Shogun.
Well, the first time around, he didn't exactly dominate.
The fight he won.
I know, but I'm saying it wasn't exactly easy for him.
No, sure.
I think preparing for Machida's always problematic. You know, the way he masters distance. He's a southpaw on top of it. Got great takedown defense. He always seems to make guys fight his style, and I think that's the key to this. You know, Mark Munoz has to kind of get into his face, and he has to make the fight his own, into his image, and that's always the challenge for him. And the thing is, for Mark Munoz, this is a much bigger platform for him. This is a much bigger opportunity than Michael Bisping, even though Michael Bisping would have been fighting at home. Let's face it, Machida was a former champion. Mark Munoz wants to show that he's still capable of winning a championship at middleweight, even though Machida won his championship at 205. The fact of the matter is that is a shark-infested division. To win that championship and to do the damage that he's done there, the guy is as legit as it gets. So for Mark Munoz to go in and possibly beat him, that's a huge statement.
Yeah, I agree. You were mentioning like kind of getting in his face. That's always the problem, right? Because I think Machida probably punishes aggression more than about anybody out there with his sort of retaliation, how he fights. So like just like you were mentioning, how he uses space, everything else. I would say he's the tougher fighter, but it is interesting when you look at a guy like Michael Bisping fighting in that country. When he's fighting in England, he's 6-0. He's always been very hard out in England, whereas he's only 8-5 in America. His record overall is really, it's really good. But he does. He raises.
He lost that Hamill fight.
Wow. Well, he raises up a notch at home. So I mean, in terms of the sort of sideline stuff, he's getting at least a guy now more on neutral ground, which maybe does play a factor in a fight like this.
And you guys mentioned how tough it is to figure out Machida. He's trained with him. He's worked as his wrestling coach. Doesn't that give him some kind of an advantage?
Sure, of course. It gives him much more of an advantage than he ordinarily would have. But it's hard to explain. Like, you can train with a guy for your whole life and not be able to do anything to him. Like, that's just the reality.
Was it the Mike Pyle thing that was going on just recently?
Like my man crush, Marcus Almeida Buchecha. He's training over at AKA. Guarantee you, Cain Velasquez and Daniel Cormier can train the rest of their life. They are not going to beat him with a gi on. Period. It's not going to happen. That's just the kind of thing we're doing. But you can be a coach. You can learn Buchecha's setups. You can learn some of his tricks. Does he like the Berimbolo from the X-Guard pass? All this crazy stuff. You can learn all that. That doesn't really make a difference in the end if there's enough of a gap in skill level. I could be wrong. I'm theorizing there's enough of a gap in skill level.
It's interesting, Mike. He mentioned Okami, and he's gone now. He's cut, and we'll get to that in a second.
He still exists. He's
just he's gone from the UFC. He's not available. But wouldn't it have made sense? You don't have to ruin the Fight for the Troops card. And for the record, I don't disagree with the Okami release, and we'll get that in a second. But Munoz lost a very important fight to Okami back on a UFC on Versus card in San Diego, way back when. If you can't beat Yushin Okami at 185, and I hate the word gatekeeper, more of a litmus test, that's what I like to use. If you can't beat him at 185, then you don't deserve to take that next step. A rematch there, in a fight that he has always thought was one of his stinkers that he could have, avenged, a rematch there kind of would have made a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, but how long do you hold that one loss over him? That happened a few years ago, like you said. You have to assume that guys are going to get better. They're going to improve their skill sets. And he might be on the way up and Okami might be on the way down. You just never know. Where guys are at their career at one point, that doesn't define them the rest of the way, right? So the fact that he lost him in the past, you can't hold that against him forever. I think he certainly deserves, as long as he's succeeding, and obviously the Chris Weidman hiccup aside, he's been pretty decent. That's a big hiccup, don't get me wrong. But Chris Weidman right now, he's the best middleweight in the world. So, okay, he lost the best middleweight. That doesn't mean he can't work his way back up.
All right, Chuck, let's get into Okami. And yes, it happened last Friday, but we haven't had a chance to talk about it. Do you agree with the release? The internet was up in arms. Everyone was upset. What do you think?
Well, I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but I understand it. I really liked your piece that you did on it. I thought a lot of those points made a lot of sense to me. He's a guy who he's not going to challenge for the belt again. Even if he were to win a lot and there's a new title holder at the top, I just don't foresee them putting him at the top again to fight for that belt. For one thing, he's one of the best Japanese UFC fighters we've ever seen, if not the best. He's I think like 13-5. That's his.
More
you
stats.
Guys like my stats, don't you?
Give me more.
Well, you look at his record, particularly because of the situation.
Right.
But he's just one of those guys who he's sitting in a spot. It's almost like he's entrenched now around that number 5 spot. He literally is a gatekeeper, a litmus test. He literally is that guy. He doesn't want to move weight classes. He fights in a style that people don't really dig that much. He's not a big star in Japan. Like when they went to Japan, he wasn't headlining those cards.
Sure.
He becomes more of a problem than anything else because the guys that they want to bring up, they want to bring up. They don't want to have them go through Okami, who might shut them down. You know what I'm saying? So it becomes like a problem that, that he's in a weird situation. It's, I guess, similar to the John Fitch thing.
I was just going to say,
Right.
you take Okami out of what he was saying, that's John Fitch. Killing off guys like Eric Silva and not really going to contend, not a huge draw. It's the same
I don't think we
dilemma.
can say he would never contend for the title again or challenge for it.
I'm saying that they wouldn't want. In my mind, he wouldn't
exactly.
want them
How
to.
do you sell it?
It was a laborious task to get him that first one.
Yeah.
Well, as far as selling it, I mean that's a whole other issue. But that is the reality of sports today, and particularly MMA. Like there's the business side, which is what they do in the cage, and then there's the entertainment side. And I think this is just more evidence that these guys have to realize that they are more than just what they present when they come into the cage on fight night. They have to present some personality. They have to fight with some passion, some charisma. They need to bring more than just their fighting skills, because when push comes to shove, I mean, and you're looking for the little things that make a guy expendable or determine that he is worth keeping, giving one more option. Those are the things that they can out. He has not been considered an exciting fighter. He's been very good. He's been successful. He's not a guy that people pay to see.
His most exciting fights are literally the ones where he's getting knocked out, and with a few exceptions. I mean, there was a UFC 82 where he beat Evan Tanner. Really, there's a few fights where he had his own big offensive nights, but most of the times when we're talking about an exciting Okami fight, it's because Tim Boesch came back on him in the third round and dropped him when he was losing a really boring fight.
That's a hater comment, Chuck Mindenhall.
Well,
no, it's true though. Even the Evan Tanner knockout was sort of like, it was kind of like sad in a way, because I guess they won't feel bad for Evan Tanner. My take on it is I'd like to work backwards from this problem, which is that why everyone's like, why is MMA media so obsessed with business reporting, like ratings and ticket sales and stuff? And I don't know what the answer is, but if I had to guess, I guess is that the answer is combat sports are low to the earth. The reality is they don't have enough natural popularity and natural enthusiasm and support and this rarefied air that football does, where it's just about winning. Like if I'm from DC, so can you imagine if Shanahan yanked RG3 and put in Grossman, because he's like, hey, listen, he throws more interceptions, but he's a gunslinger. There'd be pitchforks in front of his house in McLean. It would be a nightmare. But the reality is, combat sports, whether you like it or not, it can reach Mayweather rarefied air, but it doesn't really exist there. It exists right here. And I think MMA fans have seen all these promotions collapse, and they've seen fighter life cycles go up and they go down. And so we're kind of curious, are these guys selling? And do people watch them on TV? And no one knows that more than Dana White. Dana White is the ultimate fight fan, and this was a guy, and I've had my issues with him in the past. This is a guy who was in the trenches, who was $40 million in the hole. No wonder he's sensitive about the product. No wonder he's invested in it and wants to see it succeed. And listen, the decision to cut Okami, I am okay with sports being boring for the sake of preserving integrity, but it's not my business. That's his business. That is, the UFC is owned by the Fertittas and Dana White and Flash Entertainment. They're the ones who have to worry about this. And so there's a question of, was cutting Okami prudence or was it paranoia? You can have a debate about that. But the idea that combat sports deserves to be treated with the exact same integrity that you would for and by the way, everyone cries when there's, when it's the Marlins versus whoever in the World Series because the ratings are going to go down. But you have to be sensitive to the reality of combat sports. There is an element of spectacle to it, and you have to engineer around that.
What I thought
no
was
sense of promotional malpractice in this case.
Bang! You got me, Chuck. You got me.
a little sound.
We need a bell.
By the way, I mean, I would
For
like
the
to
drinking
point
game
out,
at home that people play.
Take a shot.
I would like to point out, even in the NFL, even in the NFL, it's not always 100% about performance. I mean, you see guys every year that are former All-Pro guys that are still playing at a high level, but there's someone else who makes a lot less money than them and is almost as good, so that guy gets cut, because he's making too much money.
Or Tebow probably outlasted longer than he should have been because he was so popular.
Right, yeah. So there's that element in every sport, just maybe not to the same degree.
I was sensing a lot of hypocrisy from the fans, really, I have to say, because, I never heard these. I never heard from anyone, I'm excited about this Okami fight. I don't foresee them following Okami to his next promotion and getting, all jazzed up about it. And then the thing I heard from many people, I'm not an Okami fan, but this just isn't fair.
You see this all the time. You saw it with the Attila Vey thing in Bellator.
Right.
People are like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this to Attila Vey. Yeah, name 3 of his fights, jerkface. You can't.
It's just this approach. I don't know if it happens in other sports because I don't cover them, but it's like we feel as fans that we have to yell, and things will happen. It doesn't always
you don't
work
have to
that
be a
way.
fan of somebody though to say whether something is fair or unfair, though, do you? I mean,
But
you
why
could
do you
look
care
at it
so much then?
objectively.
And honestly, why do you care so
Because
much
you're a
then?
fan of the sport,
The
and
integrity-
you don't
like
want
the
to see it to
integrity
happen
of
to
the
guys
sport,
that you
something
actually
like
do
that.
It's
like.
hypocritical. If you were a bigger fan of his, if you followed him more, then they wouldn't have cut him.
I wouldn't
If he
say
was a
it's
draw, then they
hypocritical.
wouldn't
I
have
wouldn't
cut
say
him.
it's hypocritical. I understand what you're saying. Certainly, if he had this huge fan base and he was a draw and they could put him in
Dan Hardy.
events,
Us 4 in a row.
it wouldn't be, he probably wouldn't have been cut. I agree with you. That doesn't make them hypocritical. I think it's fair to be objective and look at the evidence and look, okay, what's the landscape of the division?
But
What
there
has
is
he
a
done in his
precedent.
career?
John Fitch.
There's a precedent. That doesn't mean you're hypocritical. You're just being objective. You can objectively look at
Also,
facts and determine whether
it's
something
creating
is
a
fair or
stink to
not.
create a stink.
Also, the way is like Dana White can't come out and say, "Hey, I'm cutting this guy because he's boring." I mean, he can't really do that. So he has to say, "Well, he's a gatekeeper." Okay, then what is Joe Lauzon?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the problem is he had to sell the argument
Sure.
on sporting terms, and I think that enraged people because
After
it's
the
clearly
fact.
not true. Like,
Sure, but and I don't think that's fair to call Okami a gatekeeper. Do you agree?
I don't think he's fair to call him a gatekeeper, but I wrote in my piece, he wasn't really coming or going.
Right.
Like he wasn't going to get a title
That's what I
shot.
say,
He
he
could
was
beat
like
really good
entrenched
guys,
in-
but not the best guys. So like he was just kind of holding.
Like number 5, he was just going to stay there.
That
He
was
just
kind
going
of
to be
his-
This is the litmus test. If you beat him, you take that next step.
which is a valuable thing to have, but
Right.
I
there are
don't.
plenty of those in the UFC.
Yeah, like Nick Ring. Like, what is Nick Ring? What position does he hold? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not.
Nick Ring. Jeez.
Well, I'm not like bagging on these guys, but like if you're cutting a guy because if it's alleged meritocracy and this is the reason Okami's a gatekeeper, it's like, well, what about all the guys way behind him?
Absolutely. But is Okami a guy that you're going to put on the Facebook prelims? I don't know. He's been up there, and it's tough to have him.
I don't know.
It's just a problem because they don't want the guys that they want to bring up to run into him, and he puts them back. It's just the bottom line.
Jacare disposed of him, and unfortunately, there was no place for him. Now, let's stick with someone who Yushin Okami is very familiar with, Chael Sonnen. That video came out last Saturday where Vanderlei Silva confronted him in Las Vegas, and this was met, I think, in large part by a lot of ho-hums. Like, I see through this. People thought it was orchestrated. People thought Chael was in on it. Of course, it was somewhat orchestrated because Vanderlei brought a crew with him. But does this make you, all this stuff, does it make you want to see the fight more? Or do you feel at this point, until this fight is booked, leave me alone with the whole Vanderlei Chael stuff?
Yeah, it doesn't make me want to see the fight at all. Now I understand.
Does it make you want to see it less?
It makes me, in a sense, because if that makes this whole thing go away, then sure.
Really?
Right. Well, I mean, they just get it over with and just stop. You know what I mean? Then I don't have to hear about it anymore, and therefore I want to see the fight. I'm interested in seeing what Chael Sonnen can do with the rest of his career, and for what's left of Vanderlei Silva, same thing. Both of them have had some good fights recently. Against Stan and against Shogun, but. This whole thing, like you guys know me, I can't speak for the rest of the fan base.
Sure.
I understand that the rest of the fan base might be in on this whole pro wrestling thing. I would rather be set on fire than watch a Vanderlei Silva promo video.
I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who would
are
like to
horrible.
set you on fire.
I'm sure they would. I'd rather have my
ones you're
family
trying to
set
speak
on
for.
fire in front of me than watch one of these. People are like, did you see the video? I'm like, no, I'm 34 years old.
You didn't
Thanks.
even click on it.
The first one, no. The second one, because like he attacked somebody at this expo.
You like ejaculatory
I watched
guitar,
it.
don't
I
you? You
watched
would have
it.
loved it.
I watched the point of the confrontation, and then then there's Vanderlei doing like the intro to a rap B-side where he's threatening all the people on the West Coast because he's an East Coast rapper. I was like, what are we doing here? Like, what a detour off of what I got into this whole thing.
How is this different than Shamrock and Baroni?
I don't know. Listen, I don't know.
From Debbie Downer.
Listen, no. You're asking me
People
like
have put out videos before.
I can only speak to my interests.
Sure.
I cannot speak to commercial viability. I cannot speak to whether that will actually work, and maybe it will. I cannot speak. And do I have a sense that Chael is in on it? Probably. I
think so?
I don't know. I mean,
You didn't watch it.
I watched. I watched the confrontation.
Okay.
Get your cameras out of here! Like, oh my God, that kind of thing.
That's pretty good.
I don't know, but I can just tell you personally, I got into the sport because I like watching really guys who are really good at fighting fight. I didn't watch it to see if they had, street brawls or if someone's made a yo mama joke. Like, I don't really care about that stuff.
But you need that friction,
I don't
right?
know, man. This is the same guy who a couple weeks ago was talking about like the spectacle and the pageantry of the Canelo Finn Mayweather fight and how incredible it was.
Tell me the trash they talk. Tell me the trash that they talk.
It's all kind of related, though.
Dude,
it's like cousins.
Dude, running up on somebody in an expo is ghetto.
Well, it's
Canelo was the hope of a nation. Floyd is the highest paid athlete in sports.
He's an athlete. He's not the hope of a nation. He's an athlete.
Okay, but he's presented in a way where it's elevated. He didn't go, I'm going to catch you at the Quick Trip and swing on you while you're pumping unleaded into your Prius.
But my point is that there's an element of spectacle to sports that we all enjoy, right? Sure. For you, it's that particular, there's different levels.
Sure.
There's different,
Yes.
So it's all interrelated. Luke doesn't like that where it's over the top. He likes it more when it's organic to the whole process. Some other people prefer a little more, maybe manufactured, we'll call it.
What do you think? Do you think that this hurts the fight, or do you think that, like when you were watching it, what were you thinking?
It did nothing. I mean, I'm honestly more in that camp. It did nothing for.
It.
Yeah, I mean, I can enjoy it for what it is, but ultimately, if the fight was really offered and Wanderlei didn't take the fight, then it just seems ridiculous for him to come up there and make that confrontation. Because what the whole point of fighting is that eventually they're going to fight. This isn't a ball sport where they're going to go play basketball or something like that. They're going to actually fight, so they're going to settle it in the most willful manner they can possibly do it, the most satisfactory way you can possibly do it. But that's not going to happen. I mean, he's just going up. Chael Sonnen has a fight with Rashad Evans. They've been back and forth so long. So at this point, it's sort of like, why? And it's not like I side with Chael Sonnen on this particular thing. I thought his response was accurate. Like he should respond like, "What are you doing?" But. On the show, on UFC Tonight, he's still making his cracks towards Wanderlei Silva. They're both feeding it, and ultimately, you want to see the fight on some level happen, just because you want to make sure that they actually do it, and they just that they capitalize on it. It will happen.
It's going to happen.
I have my doubts at this point because we've been teased for so long. Like you guys know, I fall for this stuff. Better than anyone. I love this stuff. But at this point, it's almost unfortunate. Chael's fighting Rashad Evans. That's a very important fight. That's a very interesting fight. And it's a huge fight. Co-main event, 20th anniversary show. I don't want to hear about Wanderlei anymore until that fight is signed. And I can guarantee you, leading up to the fight, fight week, post-fight press conference, all the questions are going to be about Wanderlei. I even made that mistake, if you want to call it, when Chael was on the MMA Hour. 90% of the interview was about Wanderlei Silva. That's the fight people want to see. But until we get the fight, until it's actually being promoted and signed, I say enough is enough.
Listen, I don't blame Chael because as an athlete, we were just talking about making yourself a viable commodity and making yourself, someone that they can't let go. He's doing that. He's building interest in fights that don't even exist. That's the best job security that you're going to have. I'm not saying he does, but the fact that he is always pushing this fight, right? He's always pushing something more, and that's probably the best job security you can have in the UFC is to keep saying, hey, even if I lose, there's this in the future.
I wish to me that the fight appeared competitive. To me, it just doesn't seem like a very competitive fight. And it's nothing against Wanderlei Silva. It's just the style matchup. I feel like he's going to be taken down, and that's going to be that. If it had more intrigue to me on that level too, then maybe that video would register more. Like, well, this inevitable confrontation will happen at some point. But to me, the fight doesn't seem all that competitive.
Yeah, but the weigh-in would probably be cool.
Yeah, the weigh-in would be good.
And then last thing, real quick, I've lost the pro wrestling debate. There's no doubt about it that kind of stuff works.
So I won?
You and everyone else who supports that stuff. But you're asking me, does it get me excited?
Sure.
No.
And no one begrudges you for that. Different.
Okay, fair enough. So, to Mike's point, you're right. He is setting up his next fight, and if he beats Rashad, what do you think he's going to talk about in that post-fight speech? No doubt about it. But it doesn't do anything for me. And me, I'm just like, okay.
The good thing is, even if he loses that fight, they still can they can still.
I say as an athlete, it's promotional malpractice. If you don't promote your own career,
all right, y'all are going to the well more than I am.
Guys, let's talk about a very serious and somber subject. Late last week, a fighter by the name of Leandro Feijão Souza died. The story right now is that he died while cutting weight for a Shoot to Brazil 43 card in Rio. And I can't even imagine. I mean, a horrible tragedy, and in my opinion, the first we've seen of its kind in mixed martial arts. Fighter cutting weight, an excessive amount of weight, going down to flyweight, and unfortunately passing away. I think if this would have happened in the United States, UFC card, it would have made major headlines. Fortunately, it happened. Unfortunately, I'm saying it happened in Brazil, and it's not getting a lot of attention here stateside. But is this a major warning sign? Should we really start to think about weight cutting and how it's done, and how it's being done improperly, and how it should be done? I mean, what do you take away from this?
It is scary. Part of the reason why I don't think it's happened yet in the UFC is because the guys who typically make it to that level are either A, with an elite camp with somebody who knows how to do it, or some guys are just better at it. You get a lot of wrestlers in there. There's just better best practices at that level of the game. But what does that mean? That means it's a lot of luck, to be honest, a little bit. If you go back and look at what the NCAA did in 1997 when they had 3 wrestlers die in 30 days, they added 7 pounds to all the weight classes. So if you were like 118, now you could get at 125. That was like a bit of a help. But they do hydration tests, and they do 2-hour outside weigh-ins. I don't know if that would work in MMA because I think these guys are like, you wrestle a whole season. These guys need that money on that night. I don't know what the right answers are, but here's what I'm worried about. Like, it's not even just Dana White at this point. Like, all MMA promoters now are like, we're regulated by the government, and that is true. But boy, is that a hindrance now. Because if the NFL tomorrow want to say, okay, no more kickoffs, no more kickoff returns, you're just going to start on the 20 and you're going to drive down the field, they can do that. There's nothing prohibiting that. UFC has lobbied to get all the states to have more or less, not quite, but basically uniform rules of regulation. They wouldn't have to go back and get all of them to change, or at least the bigger ones, California, Nevada, New Jersey, whatever, which they may be sympathetic to, but then who's going to cover that stuff? Who's going to pay for that stuff? NCAA can pay for that stuff. Individual Cornell University wrestling team, they can pay for that stuff. That is hard to do. And now they're in a bit of a pickle. And Dana White is in the position where, because he's the only one asked about it, because he's the face of the sport here in the country, really the world. And all he can say is, I can't control these guys. And that's true, but is the time bomb ticking or not? I don't know the answer to that.
That hydration test that you mentioned, that's interesting. I'd never heard of that before. I'm not a huge knowledgeable about college wrestling. But yeah, I would assume that would probably be very difficult as far as, like Luke said, setting it up through the commissions. The fact of the matter, these guys are all professional athletes. They're all adults. There's a certain element of danger in professional sports. And unfortunately for these guys, apparently it's not only when you're fighting in a cage, it's also when you're doing things like cutting weight and doing things like training. Unfortunately, there are going to be injuries. At times, there are even going to be deaths. I don't know that it's something that you can completely put an end to. Obviously, it's important to take the best precautions that you can to make things as safe as you can. But unfortunately, and sometimes there are pre-existing conditions that affect these things. I think, I don't know if it's known 100% for sure, if that was the case here, if it was completely 100% related to him cutting weight, or if he had some pre-existing conditions that, caused his ultimate death. But for the most part, I think we are seeing improvements in weight cutting. You have some guys that are really knowledgeable about strength and conditioning, guys like Mike Dolce and other guys at other camps, like Luke said. Fortunately, in this country, we're lucky that we have this, history of wrestling and guys that are.
I fear the younger guys who can't afford the Mike Dolces,
that is
who are
the
coming
problem.
up and taking these fights on short notice. It could be very
And that's
dangerous.
what I was going to say. People have to be realistic when they're taking these fights as well. There's so many guys who take these fights where they're going to have to cut a massive amount of weight, sometimes in excess of 30 pounds in a very short period of time. That's never going to be good for your body, especially when you're not even mentally prepared to jump into that situation, much less physically. You look at guys like, I know Chris Weidman did that for the Damon Maia fight, and you talked to him about that. It scarred him, I think, a little bit. That was one of the hardest.
Usually we celebrate
things.
when guys do. It's like, wow, look what this guy was able to do.
Or afterwards we just talk about, well, he didn't look himself against Damon Maia. But you're like, well, the guy just almost killed himself to even put himself into the fight against Damon Maia. Everybody knows like the Daniel Cormier, the thing that kind of went down with him.
That was improper management on his part, though.
Yeah. Well, you know what I'm saying. But you hear about guys with they say that they can no longer produce sweat, the kidneys. A lot of times it's because they're trying to dump a massive amount of weight in a very short amount of time. I liked what Mike Dolce was saying on your show on Monday about it being more of a lifestyle. I know it's not going to be, when you can't just force that on all those fighters, but guys who know that they're going to fight within a weight class, that's where they're going to be, should try to hover in that space a little better throughout all the time, not letting themselves balloon up to the point where, if there is a short notice situation, it seems like the times we really hear about is in short notice situations, guys who really think they need that fight.
Yeah. Luke,
I was going to say, even Chris Weidman, I think he cut something like 35 pounds. Now, again, we kind of celebrate. Hey, look at how brave this guy is. He stepped up and did this. When the UFC asked him to take the fight, he lied to them and told them he was within 20-something pounds, whatever. Right? So, in a sense, like, you have to be honest with yourself. Now, he made it, and obviously he didn't suffer any consequences except for a little bit of lethargic performance in the cage, but he did take a chance with his health by doing that, and the people around him took a chance as well.
final thing on this, Luke. You said, okay, 2 hours before a fight. That's probably not realistic. But what about same-day weigh-ins? And I believe it was either Mike Dolce or Boom Boom Mancini on Monday's show who said, if you can't fight with how much you weigh that morning, then you shouldn't be able to fight. You know, what about a weigh-in at 9 a.m., you're fighting at 9 p.m., how about that?
Yeah, well, one quick point. I also think that promoters have some culpability here. It's true that Weidman lied, but if you're going to ask a guy to cut weight, you need to not just ask him how much he weighs. How much? Show me. Go to the doctor and weigh in and fax that report to us now. We need to see, because if you're asking a guy, it's just not mathematically possible. You know, I think there is some culpability there. But anyway, to your point, the debate is in college wrestling. They're wrestling. They're wearing headgear. The matches are short, at most 6 minutes, roughly. I could be wrong with that. I forget now. The long story short is that they're short periods. And so the question is, you know, you're not getting punched in the head, you're not getting kicked. You may get slammed, you may get bruised up, but it's not the same level of potential for brain trauma. Getting punched is a completely different thing. Your brain gets rattled. So the debate is, the mat side weigh-ins or the 2 hour weigh-ins, that can work for wrestling. Can it really work for fighting? It's, you know, having those weigh-ins there on the same day. The answer is, you know, in the morning, 9 a.m., 9 p.m., the answer is we don't really know if it will work. I'm curious to see it tried, but, you know, a lot of people are like, let's try it on the amateur ranks. Man, that doesn't count. Like, that's not the same thing. And really, mid-level pro regional MMA is not even the same animal as UFC level MMA. It's two different worlds that people occupy. If you've never been to a regional show, go. You will find that out. It'll be monster trucks flying over your head while two guys fight. So, and a different level of athlete and different level. The answer to that is I don't know. Some kind of experiment needs to be tried. I'd like to see the UFC lead the way if they can, but these are difficult questions, and no one really has a good answer.
Yeah, same-day weigh-ins, I think, are probably not the right answer. I'm pretty sure it's been scientifically proven that the body needs a certain amount of time to rehydrate. Guys are going to still try and cut weight, even if weigh-ins are the same day of the fight. Sure. They need enough time to rehydrate so that water can get into your brain and have that little extra protection.
Chuck, let's quickly touch on Renzo Gracie, who has been flirting with the idea of coming back essentially since his last fight against Matt Hughes, which wasn't a great fight. It was at UFC 112 in Abu Dhabi. It seems to have picked up some steam. Dana White was asked about Renzo in Brazil last week, and his answer was kind of the answer he was going to tell BJ Penn whenever they had that discussion that never happened. Why? You know, you've accomplished so much, great family, great business. Why? Renzo really wants to fight. He really wants to fight. He says he'll even do it for free. Do you have any interest in seeing him return at 46?
Well, first of all, what is it? Is it 2013? Because we're at 3 years. Because it was 3 years between his Frank Shamrock fight and his next. So I seem like every 3 years he wants. Oh, let's get together and
stat.
They always, you know. But. Do I have interest in it? Not really. I mean, honestly, I didn't have that big of an interest. There was interest because he was fighting Matt Hughes in that Abu Dhabi card. You know, Matt Hughes and his relations with the Gracies, that sort of thing. There was some interest on that level for me, but at this point, at 46 years old, not really. It just seems like he wants to prove to himself he can still compete. And the UFC is not really known for that sort of. They try not to be known for that sort of novelty thing. There's been some exceptions here and there, but to me, if he's going to do that, he should do it elsewhere other than the UFC. And I would watch it, but I don't know if it really matters that much.
World Series of Fighting, right? The home of the
World Series of Fighting. You know, I would be interested in seeing Renzo Gracie, and I mean this truly, on a Metamoris card against somebody kind of cool, where because jiu-jitsu you can still hold on to a lot of the things that you're good at for a longer time. But fighting, man, like, you know, if you go back and look at the Wikipedia entry for the Hughes Renzo fight, it's like TKO leg kicks and punches. It's like, wow. And I went back and watched it. I was like, he got leg kicked in this fight by Matt Hughes.
Right.
You know, it's just not really a viable choice at this point, at this level of the game and this stage of MMA's development. But I do think that people love Renzo Gracie, and deservedly so. The guy is awesome and was a pioneer and is a really good jiu-jitsu black belt. I wouldn't mind seeing him compete, just in something that makes a little more sense for everybody.
What do you think?
I just don't see a reason why he should even get the chance, to be honest with you, just because he's a Gracie. I don't think that's a good enough reason, to be honest with you. It's one thing if he had been active all this time, you know, and had been winning and successful, but, you know, he got the one chance against Matt Hughes. He did not do well at all. Why does he deserve another chance 3 years later? You know, it's not like it's 6 months later and he said, you know, I struggled, give me another chance. No, it's just he wants to do it. Well, That's not how UFC works, is it? I mean, they're just going to give him a chance on a whim. I just don't think he deserves a chance for no particular reason. If there's no room in the UFC for Yushin Okami, I don't see why there should be for Renzo Gracie. With all due respect to the guy, he's obviously been an important figure in mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu, but
They could give him that pen rematch at welterweight.
No, how about this idea? Tough Brazil, Renzo Gracie, Royce Gracie. How about that?
Well, now he is. Huh?
Tough Brazil. Pay attention.
Sorry.
Tough Brazil, Renzo Gracie, Royce Gracie as coaches. You're telling me that wouldn't be a big deal over in Brazil? That'd be a huge deal. They don't have to fight. I don't care about them fighting.
So we're doing singles matches now?
No fighting. Just as coaches.
Oh.
Representatives for the
You
sport.
say no fighting, but would they
Yeah,
fight
but
it
then
then?
I
cares if
would
they-
want to see them fight then, just to see
Well, then that's
Renzo versus Royce. That'd be kind of cool.
You get caught up in all that hype and
I
everything.
do.
Yeah, that's your stuff.
Listen, if they put out a video where they attack each other in an expo, I'm sold.
Okay, let's end on this, guys. Today, October 4th, is the 5-year anniversary of the death of Elite XC. Chuck wrote a fantastic piece about that fateful weekend in Sunrise, Florida. Kimbo Slice getting knocked out by Seth Petrozelli. And, you know, just on this anniversary, we fall on October 4th, and I think it's one of those dates that, you know, hardcore fans will remember. What's Elite XC's legacy? Was it all negative? Was it all the House of Cards, smoke and mirrors, Kimbo, or did they do anything positive?
It seemed like they really were top heavy. That's when you talk to everybody within who were the big players in that promotion. It seemed like that was the common theme. There were too many people working it. There were too many chefs in the kitchen, and they were spending lots of money where they didn't need to do it. And then so they started to put all their eggs in the basket of Kimbo Slice, who was drawing huge ratings from that first CBS card. It seemed like you know, at that point, that's what the fans wanted to see. He sort of did have a Mike Tyson sort of aura to him. People were interested. I remember specifically, I wasn't at the card. I know you were there, but I remember watching it with a group of people, and everybody was sort of enthralled with what was going to happen with Kimbo Slice. A lot of people knew who he was who were not fight fans, and I think that was sort of the thing that they recognized, but it was always going to be a house of cards because everybody knew, and if you followed the fight game, you knew at some point he was going to fall. It just so happened that it happened on a night where chaos basically ensued, and Seth Petrozelli was sort of thrown in there. There were so many things going on backstage. So it was one of those things. As far as their legacy, I don't know. To me, it just seems like a wasted, like they had a wasted movement, honestly, because they had so many good fighters underneath Kimbo Slice. If you really go down and look at all the guys, I mean, it was supposed to be Nick Diaz against Eddie Alvarez on their next card. I mean, just that fight by itself, you look at something like that, and like, well, they had some great, you know, some great fighters on there. Cyborg Santos was going to fight on the fought on the undercard that night. I mean, it was all the eventual Strike Force, but there were other components to it. It was just they really had a good thing, but they just, I think, mismanaged their money.
Other than the great Dana White video.
That is the best rant ever.
What do you think of when you think of Elite XC?
Well, I think that they were damned if they did, damned if they didn't, because they were in a position where, you know, they got the CBS deal so quickly that it was like, we have to put our biggest star into this huge vehicle, and it was Kimbo. Unfortunately for them, it was Kimbo. Now, Kimbo could draw a lot of eyeballs, but as you said, I mean, this guy was he was not even close to a finished product as a mixed martial artist. Everybody who was in the sport knew that. CBS probably didn't. They were just thrilled about the ratings he got. But all of us knew when Kimbo lost, it was going to be a big blow to them. It was just going to be a matter of whether they can withstand that blow, and in the end, they couldn't. But you cannot take away the fact that Elite XC is the one who got on network television first. I was at that card in New Jersey. I don't know if any of you were there. I think that's where we met.
We met for the first time.
Yes.
You were with NBC Sports at the time.
Yes, we were at prime time together.
You guys don't remember me being there. It's okay.
Were you there?
I was there.
MMA rated?
Absolutely.
Okay.
John Anik and I met for the first time there, so I have my own little story.
Did we meet?
No, we
Do we already know? Anyways, who cares about that? But yes, I think you can't take away from them the fact that they're the ones who got on network television first, even if they probably were not ready for it. That was still kind of a cool feeling. It was kind of like, you know, the sport's arrived. You know, UFC had been on Spike for years, and they've done stuff with Fox Sports Net at the time and stuff like that.
Though.
But it had a very different feeling. It's like tonight, like my friends are going to turn this on, and it's going to be on national TV.
One thing that's hilarious though about the whole thing is that we're talking about CBS and that first mainstream exposure, and you took a guy from the streets, from the back alley with gold teeth, and, you know, just crazy menace to him, and they he becomes their star, like the star. It's just so funny how things like that work.
He was the anti-Luke Thomas, like
Yeah.
he was the guy that Luke would have been completely against. The YouTube sensation,
Yeah.
the guy who had hype for no real reason. It
But
was
that beard, what a beard, what a glorious beard.
Final word on Elite XC.
I think the legacy is all the things I've mentioned. We can't forget what they did for Gina Carano. I mean, Strikeforce put on the Cyborg Carano fight, but she was a big deal. We were on that card together. What a pop she got when she came out. They made her a big deal in that organization, and credit to them because that set up future opportunities that eventually led to what we have now with Ronda Rousey. That's true. Elite XC gets that credit.
They did a lot for women's MMA.
They did a lot for
that
women's
first
MMA.
fight,
You gotta give them
Kenzie
credit.
and Crown on the first card.
And some of the people that were on Elite XC were the ones trying out for the Ultimate Fighter this season. It's like, oh, I remember Tanya Evinger
Right.
and stuff like that, you know? So there's that. But I think in the end, while they did have good fights and we were robbed of Nick Diaz versus Eddie Alvarez, that was supposed to happen at that last fight. We never got that. But what they did was they showed us there's a way to do MMA and be popular, and there's a way to do MMA correctly. And for all of the Tim Kennedy, Rafael Natal cards, UFC basically does MMA correctly.
Full circle.
They do. Well, it's true. No, they really do. Like they do. They care about the integrity of establishing proper weight classes and regulation and getting guys that are good and coming from good camps and giving the fight fans the sport in a way it should be presented, both from a presentation and a quality perspective. Also, I cannot recommend enough that Dana White rant against Gary Shaw and Scala, whatever the F your name is, Junior, is greatness.
They gave us Scala.
they died of promotional malpractice.
There you go!
Damn.
There you go.
Can we retire that now? I'm done with it.
Perfect way to end this week's episode of the MMA Beat. A great episode. Great to have the self-proclaimed A-team in the house and let them know how you feel about anything they've said on today's show in the comment section below. And guys, guess what? We're back next week. I don't know if you guys will be back. I'll be back next week. So
B squad.
yeah, maybe the B squad, maybe even the C squad. Who knows?
The Rafael Natals of the MMA.
Exactly. For Luke, Mike,
Sorry,
Chuck, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the MMA Beat.